cats. Everyone loves them. Everyone wants one. But what if I told you there was actually a secret cabal of shadowy figures who have been running the show behind the scenes, forcing this feline influence on all of society since the dawn of human history? For decades, I've dedicated my life to uncovering this shadowy organization, and I've uncovered a disturbing amount of influence enacted behind the scenes. The burning of the Great Library, the Irish potato famine, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Many major events in human history were orchestrated by this singular group, the Mewgenics. I recently uncovered the latest plot to keep humanity down through the use of dumb memes, funny internet videos, and worst of all, good video games. Edmund Macmillan has been compromised and likely replaced with a duplicate made to further this plot, and recently spent 12 years producing a game meant to influence the masses into accepting our new kitty overlords. But I'm stronger. I'm harder. I decided that the only way to prove my strength of will over these pussies is to prove my superiority over Edmund and his dumb fucking game. Can you beat Mewgenics with only stray cats? Now, some of you may be a bit confused by what I mean by beating Mewgenics. As since this game is a roguelite, I could say just beat the alley with only strays, call it good, and hoof it back home for Miller time. But that's boring as hell, and not a good watch. However, this game does include 3 actual endings that trigger after certain progression marks. These being, completing both routes of Act 2, beating all 3 of the Act 3 house defenses, and ultimately the final ending where you beat every boss in the game and kill God. My goal for this run is to ultimately achieve that first ending, while only using stray cats, removing the breeding and eugenics aspect of the game entirely, turning this game from Mewgenics into just M. So let's get started. As to be expected, the beginning of this run was extremely simple. When it comes to Act 1, the expectation is that you will still be mostly running low-statted strays anyways. So within my first 3 runs, I was able to unlock both the caves and the boneyard. It was a very easy and tranquil start to this playthrough, but my very next run is where I started to get some of that patented Edmund charm to my run, while running across one of the first event tiles in the alley. Blood Frenzy.
Do you like hurting other cats?
Meow!
Hey, big thanks to Isaac Brown for voicing that one. If you're ever in need of the sultry, seductive tones of an Irishman for your game or animation, I put his info in the description. Blood Frenzy is easily one of my favorite disorders in the entire game, and it's because it's either completely irrelevant, because you get it on a cat who can't do enough damage to make it matter, or you just end up doing a solo run because the Blood Frenzy cat will inevitably kill everybody. In hindsight, taking Overpowered was just a major misplay, and is what caused me to lose all the rest of my cats. But you know what they say, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Blood Frenzy on any of these bosses is pretty much just a free win. So it was a no-brainer to head down to the caves and fight Spinneret. However, I was still only barely able to eke out the win, even with the extra turns. Circa returned home triumphant nonetheless, as I completed the very first completion check of 4 required for my first ending. When it comes to Mewgenics, I think this game does a really great job, generally, of creating interesting bosses with mechanics that you need to play around, while not demanding you play a certain way. However, as with most turn-based RPGs that I've played, there will always be those 1 or 2 bosses in the game that are made to be beaten one way, otherwise you will have a very long and exhausting fight. And unfortunately, Mewgenics does not break this mold. I'm of course talking about Dybyuk and Mother. And before anyone diagnoses me with skill issue, I actually think these two are probably the easiest bosses in the entire game. That is, if you're using the builds the game wants you to be using. Dybyuk's whole shtick is that he will always dodge when directly targeted for an attack, and to compensate for this, he has very low health compared to the other Chapter 3 end bosses, and doesn't deal a lot of damage. Now, in my first hours of this game, I had thought that this was a slightly absurd and very punishing gimmick to deal with, until I realized that's all it is, a gimmick. If you pack even 1 or 2 cats with AoE, thorns, or the counterattack ability, this fight becomes laughably easy. It's to the point that if you have this stuff, you will likely struggle more with Mama Maggot, who is supposed to be the mini-boss of the area. Now, while I understand that it is always a better idea to be building your cats based on what you intend to fight, when it comes to Dybyuk, it begins to feel more like a requirement if you don't want to be finishing the fight on round 18. This, in my opinion, is not only boring, but also just kind of bad boss design. And it makes the ending of the Boneyard fall pretty flat, despite being a pretty cool area itself. Ultimately, that's what I ended up doing. I used my prior knowledge of the game, and was able to absolutely destroy Dybyuk, and unlock Act 2 in only 5 runs. Making me feel pretty good about myself, admittedly. My ego only continued to grow, though, as my next run saw me heading into the desert with one of the funniest synergies I've ever encountered since beginning this game. At the beginning I got Avenger as my starting passive on my fighter, which is normally only useful in very specific scenarios, like with the Necromancer death builds. However, halfway through the desert, my cleric would receive the Breath of Life ability. And then this is when the light bulb turned on inside my head. I proceeded to treat my ranger like the sacrificial lamb he was, and killed and revived this poor bastard over and over and over again to give my fighter an insane attack boost, allowing me to get through the desert fairly easily, and achieve my very first victory in Act 2. Pride cometh before a falleth, my Snapple fact once told me though, and just like horoscopes and Wall Street bets, I disregarded this as political pseudoscience. I was proved a fool once again, however, as I proceeded to hit the wall. I went on legitimately a 9-run loss streak as I began to lose hope that I would ever make it out of the desert again. I can't even begin to tell you how demoralizing this whole ordeal was, because before this, on my main save of the game, I had never even lost more than 2 runs in a row. Even with good synergies or amazing combos, the terrible stats of these cats made it near impossible to ever come out of a fight without losing more than half my health. And with the heat wave blocking healing, I would eventually just lose to this war of attrition. Either that, or I would roll Morana as my mini-boss, and would genuinely consider throwing my fucking PC out the window and starting a new life as an ascetic. These were dire times indeed, but I did what I always do when a challenge run begins to piss me off. Drink heavily until the solution reveals itself to me. When I had entered Act 2 previously, I was already starting to get some good stuff going for my breeding and had a few mutations in circulation. And with that, when I did finally tackle the desert, I was able to clear most encounters without losing too much health each round. However, the stats on my strays simply weren't good enough to run conventional strategy. So my mind started to wander to some of the game's more obscure mechanics. Spells like Number 1 and Forbidden Fort started to see a lot more use due to their low-cost nature, and water tiles allowing me to beat the heat and refill water bottles. After my first clear of the crater with that combo, I unlocked the Druid, who became hands down the best class for this challenge, solely due to the Crow. While the Ranger can fill the role of a summoner, the Druid is much more consistent at it, as well as always starting with a Crow that mimics their stats. By relegating my best statted strays for the Druid, I would always have this strong, consistent, and, most importantly, expendable 5th party member that would be able to help me get through the desert and obtain the strategies necessary to beat the rest of the run without making my cats completely useless with injuries. My very next run to the desert, I put this plan into action and managed to get extremely lucky with an amazing rock synergy on my tank, which meant that it was a no-brainer to head on up to the moon and eat it. I only needed 2 more victories before I could become back my money. And after a couple more losses, I ended up getting very lucky with a ping, look away, repressed memories combo that ended up carrying me through the desert and the bunker, leaving only one more and likely the hardest victory in the entire challenge. The bunker and the core are both fairly difficult areas that have numerous enemies that can cause issues depending on how your team's strategies are set up. I struggled a lot with the bunker in my initial playthrough of the game due to its enemies and bosses really discouraging slower strategies, which makes sense. Unlike the crater, which tests your ability to position and deal with status effects, the bunker is much more of a DPS test. All of the enemies in the area hit really hard, and all culminate in Rubber Johnny, who will absolutely wreck you if you do not have the damage to kill him or his summons consistently. This does have a couple of workarounds, however, as you are able to use knockback and AoE to prevent the bigger players from doing too much. Fortunately, I had planned ahead for this, and formulated a strategy that involved using a garden hose and a lightning mage. I was able to keep all the bad guys away from my cats using the crow and the garden hose, as well as being able to attack nearly everyone on the map at once using my chain lightning spell combined with the water. This strategy also worked phenomenally for the core, as that area's main gimmick is lava. And if you've ever played Minecraft, you would know that lava is nothing in the face of a single drop of water. The core was really no match for my mastery over water, and in the end, I was able to extinguish all of the candles too, ensuring that the Coven would summon the weakest form of the Tormentor. Despite a massive misplay on my part, I was able to kill the Tormentor very easily, achieving my final victory needed for the run, and making sure that Dr. Beanie's bitch ass got exactly what he deserved. While this run was frustrating, it was a lot of fun at the same time. As a roguelite, I do realize how much RNG likely played a role in the success of the 10 runs I needed to win. But along the way, I feel like I ended up learning a lot more about the areas, the classes, and generally some of the game's more niche mechanics like water and wind. While I don't think this game has the same level of replayability as Isaac, I can't deny the immense amount of thought and care that went into so many of the game's interactions and their mechanics. It certainly has been a long time since I played a tactical RPG that made me feel this smart, with how much it rewards outside of the box thinking. The last one being Into the Breach, honestly. So if you haven't played Mewgenics yet, I would highly recommend it. Thanks for watching.